Hello, this is WOWDLP Tacoma Park, 94.3 FM on the radio dial. I am Carolivia Heron, your host, and I'm here with,
Alex Lima.
all right, who just raced in for us. Thank you for
Wow.
coming. And I'm also here with Krista Schlyer. Did I
Welcome,
get it
welcome.
right? Say hello.
Yes, hi.
I usually
Great
let
to
you
be
say
here.
your own name, but I'm trying to practice it to make sure I get it right, Schlyer.
That was perfect.
And her amazing book, very impressive, River of Redemption, Almanac of Life on the Anacostia, meaning the Anacostia River.
Yes.
And a beautiful river book. And I feel like we hit the jackpot in this book. The photographs and the language are exquisite, and you need this book, and you'll be hearing more about it. I'm hoping to start a movement with you to help as in the reclaiming of some of the rivers. Some of the pictures are very sad.
Yeah.
We see the junk and trash on the Anacostia River, but the beautiful wildlife. And we'll be reading a few passages and going forward from there. Okay, you can find us on Facebook under carolivia.heron, on Twitter under carolivia, on the internet on carolivia.com, on mixcloud.com/epiccity. You can listen to old recordings of, not old, but former or past saved
Yeah.
recordings of our show. And you can listen to it online streaming at tacomaradio.org. And we are still playing with the YouTube.
YouTube actually is kind of if you wanna shorter version because YouTube does not allow us to publish with the songs. So if you want to listen just to what we talk, YouTube is the best option.
Yes, and we also chose YouTube because I have been reading more poetry and excerpts. So it's like a podcast. You can go back and listen to some of the stories and poems that we have here. And coming soon, next week, we have a novel by Bonnie Smith, Only the Heart Knows Why. I finished reading that this morning, and if I don't have my classes prepared for tomorrow, it's Bonnie's fault because I couldn't stop reading her book as well. And on 2 weeks from today, Gareth Frank will be reading and talking about his book, The Moment Between, another novel. These are both novels, although I'm told that Only the Heart Knows Why, the book we're reading for next week, is fictionalized biography, autobiography, something like that. So we'll hear more about that as we go forward. The epic moment for the week. I try to get an epic moment, and talking about rivers, it seems like it's an epic moment all by itself, self-defining. I am deep into the classics. I love the Iliad, and I name all my cats after the rivers in ancient Troy. One cat is named Samois, and the other cat is named Xanthus, and they're ancient Trojan rivers. And I wanted a golden flaming cat because the power of this river before Troy was that when Achilles runs through it, he's so angry and he's so filled with passion that he actually burns the water, and the water turns golden, red, fiery color. So I have one golden cat. That's Xanthus. That's the one that the river inflames.
Not like the river in Ohio, right? In Cleveland.
Yeah, we'll be talking about rivers and their problems in a minute. And then the other cat, Samois, is black, and because it's after when the river turns to ashes after it's been burned, after Achilles runs through it. So I have this attachment to rivers. I had the hardest time, though, finding songs about rivers. Not that there aren't many songs, but so many of them recalled slavery. And I didn't want, as bad off as things are, I didn't want to go too far in that direction, Old Man River and, those sorts of songs. But we did find some, and we will play them in a minute. So the epic moment is thinking about the rivers that birth us and that develop us. It was very hard for me when I moved to New Mexico and lived in Arizona for a while and didn't have really too many rivers around. Of course, there was the amazing Colorado River in Arizona, but that's not all of Arizona. I remember once walking on the campus of Arizona State University, and this strange smell I said, I recognize it. I don't know what it is. What could it be? What could it be? And I stood there and thought it was the smell of damp air with water in it, which you didn't smell in Arizona for the most part. They had a sprinkler system in this particular part of the campus.
So it wasn't even a river, it was just the damp air.
No, just the dampness of the air. It reminded me of home. And I knew that I'd smelled it once before. So, and, I'd like to just introduce yourself and tell us about your attachment. You said you lived in this area for a while, and still do, I guess.
Yeah,
That's
so
why I got you. Huh?
yeah. I moved to the DC area in the 1990s and lived for most of that time until now in the Anacostia watershed. But I also lived in Arizona for a very long time, so I know exactly what you're talking about the smell of damp air. Mm-hmm. And after I had been here for a while, I had worked. I do a lot of my work as nature photography. It's in the West. I do a lot of work on the U.S.-Mexico border and national parks in the West. And I hadn't really done any work where I lived. And in 2010, I was asked to do a project on the Chesapeake Bay with a group of photographers.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Oh,
and so my part was the Anacostia, the Potomac, and the James. And it was the first time I'd ever been on the Anacostia River. And I was just struck immediately the first time I went out about how beautiful it was and how much value there was despite what I had heard, all of my time here. And I just thought I really needed to be working closer to home.
Yes, I remember in one point of your book you're describing the refuse that's coming, I think it's off of Route 50 into the Anacostia. And you describe it as a cleansing system, where it falls off of these places, in these urban places, and Anacostia River takes it to the next stage, into the Chesapeake, into the ocean, and I'd never, even though I know that intellectually, I'd never perceived it as a process that is going on all the time. That we probably need to stop before it falls into the river, but not just probably, we should stop it well before then. But it was an interesting way. You write so well that I could really feel almost the sludge of the river trying to throw off this mess that was on it.
Yeah. I don't think I'd ever really thought about it consciously before I started working on this project either, that everything that's in our streets, it follows the flow of water and it ends up down the storm drains and then ends up in the streams and then in the river and then in the Potomac and then in the bay and the ocean. And it's, it is this sort of flow of everything that we throw away goes into these places that, are meant to be the source of life, and they end up being garbage dumps.
Yes. Well, we're going to talk a lot more about it. I want to read some passages, and maybe I can talk you into reading some passages.
That'd be great.
Be very nice. And I want you to know that my mother was born and grew up in the Anacostia watershed. I guess I'm still in the Anacostia watershed here in Tacoma, but she lived in the middle of the water almost. We actually have a photograph of one of our relatives prior to the Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens becoming a national park, when there was a flood there, and they had a shack that was halfway flooded, and they were standing in front of it. There's a photograph of them and the dip that goes down to the river.
Oh my gosh.
And they were just standing there. And I don't know where that picture is now. We need that.
Yes.
We don't have it.
Yeah.
And that house, which is in Kenilworth neighborhood, was such in that day that you could lie on the grass in front of the house and roll into the Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, just roll into the water.
Oh my gosh.
And sometimes we did.
Amazing.
Before the national park took it over. So, and the actual property has a stream coming off of the river and off of the Anacostia, off of the Aquatic Gardens, and runs and actually is the boundary of the property in the back. And as it travels further southward and crosses under Kenilworth Avenue, I guess it does, and into southeast Washington, D.C., it's renamed for Marvin Gaye. So we're going to listen to a Marvin Gaye song, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing, to get us started here. I thought that would be the way.
Ooh, baby, ain't nothing
I want to start by telling you a little story. I'm reading my first novel, Thereafter Johnny, has some scenes set in the Anacostia neighborhood of Washington, D.C. And so when I went to the Anacostia Museum in order to share the story, I read the section, of course, that talked about Anacostia. And after I finished my reading, a little girl came up to me and said, I didn't know Anacostia could be in a book. And she thought I had made it up and that it wasn't really in a book at all. And so I had to actually open up the book and show her the word Anacostia because she did not believe me.
That's
That
amazing.
Anacostia could be in a book.
Wow.
So you have certainly proven that Anacostia could be in a book. And
That's why I call the Anacostia the Great Divide,
yeah,
because all these people who live on the other side of the river,
yeah,
and we just hear about the
Often
other side of the
forgotten.
river.
in different ways.
It's a social divide, that river.
And so I guess that's your opening to tell how the idea of the book came to you, or were you approached? Did you approach someone else? Where did it come from?
Well, I had done a book on the U.S.-Mexico border and the impact of border policy, border walls on the landscape all along that border and the people. And it was with Texas A&M University Press. And when I finished that book, they knew that I was already working on a project on the Anacostia. And they asked me if I wanted to do a book with them.
Wow, how
And
interesting.
yeah, they have a river series. And so
really? Okay.
most of the rivers are in Texas, but I think they wanted to expand it. And they thought that this would be, a great river to work on. And originally I said I would love to, but I'm just not ready to do it. And because it was only about 2 to 3 years into the project. And a couple of years ago, when I was about 6 years into the project, I reread a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And I just loved so much the way that he looked at Sand County, Wisconsin in the 1940s and the way that it changed as the angle of the sun on the land changed and the seasons changed and how the wildlife and the plants responded to this changing angle of the sun. And I thought, I would love to do that to the Anacostia because it's just affords a kind of an intimacy and an understanding of a place that you don't get if you don't look at it, through an entire year and see the way it changes. And so suddenly I had this this is how I want to do it. And I went back to Texas A&M and I said, yeah, let's do it. Let's do this book together.
And how long did it take for you to finish all the work?
The
the photography part of it.
Yeah, the photography part of it was about 7 years.
Wow.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it looks like every minute of it. Or wow, you took time and chose your scenes and
Yeah.
picked it out very well.
A lot of time. And the last couple years, I was really trying to make sure that I had photographs from every season, from every month, really. So that it made me be very attentive to the river throughout the entire year so that I could represent the change in the season and change in the weather. And then the research was probably about 3 years in total and writing probably about 2.
Wow. And these are amazing photographs. You're a photographer as well as an author. I wanted to make sure people out there know that. And let me remind you that you're listening to Krista Schlyer. I have to look at it every time to make sure I've got the pronunciation.
It's a hard one.
And let me spell that last name Schlyer.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you can find her book, River of Redemption, Almanac of Life on the Anacostia. I can say when I first saw the title and thought about the Anacostia, I'm thinking, where is she going with that? Because you don't think of Anacostia as a river of redemption. At least I didn't until looking at your work here.
Yeah, I think it took me a long time to come to that title, but ultimately I just sort of looked at the history as I had learned about it, and it seemed that we had done so much to destroy this place that should be a sacred place, and that, I don't know, it was this sort of sense of almost shame, I think, about what we have done, but also this kind of opportunity that we have right now to redeem ourselves in the way that we've behaved, towards the river and towards the land, and so I just thought the title, and some people ask me about the title, and they say, well, do you mean the river needs to be redeemed? And no, it's not the river.
Hey, I love the way you go back further. You talk about it being the Great Divide, but she goes back earlier than that to tell some of the history, and all the way back to its naming from the native Algonquin people who were there, who gave it its name or part of its name. I don't know how. Anacostia sounds so Greek-like to me, but I guess it isn't.
Yeah.
I never checked it out before.
Yeah, it's sort of an anglicized version of not even. So there was a tribe, a Algonquin tribe that lived at the sort of the confluence of the Anacostia and the Potomac, and they actually lived all along the Anacostia. But there was a trading village at the confluence, and that trading village, the word for trading village was some form of Nacotchtank or several different versions of it that came out of the journals that the English speaking people came up with at the time. And ultimately they ended up calling the tribe the Nacotchtank as a kind of an anglicized version of their word for trading center. So it wasn't even really the name of that tribe. It was just how English-speaking peoples described them when they were writing their journals and writing back home to Europe. But they were this tribe that lived for thousands of years, as far as we know, along the river. And they managed to do that by not despoiling it and not destroying it, in large part because their population was very low and they were subsistence. They lived mostly a subsistence lifestyle. So they hunted and they fished and they farmed to some extent, but for the most part they honored the river because it was essential to their lives.
I just finished reading a couple of articles in the Smithsonian magazine talking about people who've done that throughout Florida, throughout several of the environments in our new world, if you call it, with quotation marks around new world. And I read a story of some Europeans who starved to death in a place where the Native Americans had lived with plenty of fish because they didn't fish. They refused to fish. And they ended up becoming cannibals rather than fish. And I read this last week. And it's like, why not live in conjunction with the land around you? But no. It's a mystery. People can't figure out why they didn't fish.
Yeah.
It's a very strange story. And it sounds like that community. It was a Florida community, but they were talking about sounds something like the one you're describing here with their connection. Anyway, I wanted to play next a song that one of my Navajo relatives sent to me called Mother's Happiness. And it's, as I said, Native American. This is from the Navajo people. Hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. Tapwe me was say when we tae kalawa patama hey oh hey oh hey oh So that's songs of the mother's happiness, thinking of the waters and the mothers. And that was sent to me from Arizona by my Navajo connections. And I actually am not Navajo by blood, but by connection, if you will. But I am Wampanoag by blood. So we greeted the Mayflower, and probably shouldn't have, but we did anyway. So we're connected in that way. And I want to remind you that we are listening to Krista Schlyer, the author of marvelous book on the Anacostia River of Redemption, Almanac of Life on the Anacostia. You're listening to Epic City. I'm Carol Olivia Heron, and Alex Lima is also doing the controls.
I'm the smooth operator. That's my title now.
I want to remind you that we have several Martin Luther King Jr. holiday events in the area. The annual Holiday DC Peace Walk parade starts at the Anacostia Art Center on January 21st at noon. The Millennium Stage at the Kennedy Center presents Let Freedom Ring, a tribute to Martin Luther King, Monday, January 21st at 6 p.m. And if the federal government, decides to open
Good luck.
on January 19th and 20th at the National Portrait Gallery, there will be Portrait Story Days focusing on Martin Luther King. Reminding you to listen to some of my favorite shows. You're going to stay tuned for Sugar and Spice today. And after that, that's from 5 to 6 with Ruby and Adelaide. Blues Hall of Fame from 6 to 8 p.m. And some of my favorites are Jolly Papa tomorrow from 1 to 3 on Wednesdays. And DC Roots of Music comes on in the evening. What's it, 4 to 6 with Wayne. And Wayne, I went to a meeting last week with the DC Humanities, and a woman saw my WOWD sticker and said, "Are you attached to that station?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, my husband is Wayne."
Oh, wow.
So I got to meet your wife last week. That was interesting. And be sure to tune in on Friday mornings for the folk songs.
Ballads in the morning.
Huh?
Ballads in the morning.
Ballads in the morning. It's not.
No, it's just because you love this show.
I love it.
But you can't ever remember the name for some reason.
Ballads in the morning. And on Saturday mornings, Bobby Hill with this music, this exclamation point music, jazz-based music. Next week, Ride with Clyde will be back again, and Monday night through Tuesday morning, DMV Underground with my good friends Cardo, Bukabachi, and Autumn. Okay, back to our book on the Anacostia. And where am I going to take it now? I feel like I want you to just take a passage of it, if you will, and share something, if you will.
That'd be great.
It's like you can open it at random.
Yeah. Let's see.
And share with us some of your stories.
I'll start. So maybe I could say that the book is organized as an almanac, and the months, instead of being called the way we call the months, they're named sort of after the fashion of a lot of Native American tribes, where the month was named for sort of the defining quality of its days. Mm-hmm. And so I've named them different sorts of things, like the deprivation moon is January, and the waking moon is March for spring. And this one, this reading is from May, which I call the gilded moon. By the 1st of May, the watershed is lush and loud. Fiddleheads have uncoiled themselves into a sea of green feathers that sway upon the forest floor. Beside them, Jack in his pulpit has commenced preaching. Crayfish venture from muddy hideouts in the wet ground, and broad-headed skinks peek their flame-orange heads out of brown leaf litter, shy little embers whose brilliance could set the forest ablaze if the world ever took notice of them. Certainly they prefer their anonymity. Freedom from fear and want in the skink world is a nice insect-ridden log for hiding, hunting, and when no one's watching, basking in the glorious spring sun.
That passage particularly touched my mother because when she was a brand new science teacher, she took a class there and saw a skink. And when she got back to school and told her principal and the other teachers that she saw a skink, they thought she had lost her mind. I mean, I heard of skunks, I've heard of this, but I've never heard of a skink. And
Yeah.
she had to prove that the animal actually existed.
Yeah, they're very secretive, but we have, well, I've seen at least 3 different species of skinks in the Anacostia watershed. And
Wow.
yeah, there's one that is so tiny, it's called a ground skink, and sort of hides in the leaf litter. And I have a picture, I think is in the book, of a skink, ground skink on my pinky finger.
Yes, I saw that. I wondered whose hand that was.
Yeah,
Yes. Uh-huh.
it's so tiny. Yeah,
Yes.
they're wonderful little creatures.
And one of the opening passages, you talk about the little rabbit. And you get into the soul of this little baby rabbit is sitting there on the path. And the mother rabbit is like, come on, kid, move, get out of there. It's a human being near you.
Yeah.
It could grab you and hug you or something. He just goes ahead chewing on whatever it is
Yeah.
chewing on. And it's very, I don't know, inviting, I guess is the word for it. And you have what a camera. It's like it's so close to it. It's wow.
Yeah.
And we think we have cameras with our iPhones or whatever, but wow, yours really gets close. And you can, like you said, you can see the mist and the fog collecting on the hairs of the rabbit, and it's really really powerful.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just showing it here. Of course, we can't see it across the air, but you have to go get the book, River of Redemption, Almanac of Life on the Anacostia, in order to see this. And I was starting by reading the opening paragraph there, if I may.
Please.
Just read the introduction. Remembering, one recent July morning, I walked a trail along the eastern bend of the Anacostia River near the boundary of Maryland and the District of Columbia. Meandering through cool lowland forest into bright open meadow and back again to the protective shade of the summer watershed. For miles the river was out of view, but present all the same, its ancient existence felt in the smell of the mild morning breeze, in the sight of solitary tufts of river fog clinging to the land, in the taste of the earthy, humid air. It's a poem. It's a beautifully written. It sounds like it is a poem.
Thank you.
Took me back to sitting in the window looking out at my apartment in Mayfair Mansions, looking toward one of the branches of the Anacostia, actually not directly at the Anacostia, but that Marvin Gaye branch that
Marvin Gaye branch.
And seeing the mist in the air in the morning and wondering where the colors come from. Like, is there a rainbow every morning? It seemed like it was, because the triangulation of where I was sitting in the window and the sun on one side and the water, the misty water and the air on the other. And every morning there seemed to be a rainbow if I would get up early enough before it dissipated, before it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wonderful.
very beautiful, and your work evokes that scene for me. And you were asking, we're more than halfway through. We were talking about the beauty of it, but let's talk about some of the. I was like heartbroken at part of it, and I got toward the end to read some of the passages, because it seems like when I think of Anacostia, and many times, much like what Alex was saying, I think about trying to help the people or work with the people. Maybe I need help from them. That may be the wrong way to put it, because some of the stories are powerful and stories that I need to do the work I do from the people of Anacostia. And then I read this book and I feel like, what if we do all this and we all get our stories together and save ourselves, and there's no land and it's all gone because we weren't paying attention to what we were living on, the land and the water and the interconnection, that we were so busy trying to stop the social evils between human beings that we didn't think about what happened to the land. I don't know why. I've heard lots of people talk about that, and it's. I have to say that even though I know it's important, it doesn't affect me so much. But this time it did, and it's for. I think it's because of the beautiful words evoke the beauty of the land so much.
Oh, thank you.
And bald eagles found dead after DDT spraying. And I'm just turning to arbitrarily to some pages, and some of the junk. Can you talk about the destruction, the terrible part, maybe even the dump?
Yeah, so there's so much. I think the dump's a good place to start. So the Anacostia Park was designated in 1918, so little over a century ago. And originally, so it was a federal park, and it was essentially all the land along the Anacostia. And originally, it was managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and then it was taken over by the National Park Service in the 1930s. But one of the things that the Army Corps of Engineers did was they were dredging the river, and the dredge material, which was all manner of everything that we had thrown into the river up to that point, they took the dredge material and they dumped it on the wetlands of the Anacostia. And, of course, we know now ecologically that was a terrible thing to do,
Yes.
because wetlands are so important in so many ways. But they destroyed almost all of the wetlands on the Anacostia. Yeah. And from that, there was this sort of addition to the park, and the National Park Service took it over. In the 1930s, as Washington, D.C. began to grow, our production of garbage also began to grow, and the city had no place to put it. So they negotiated with the Park Service to dump it on the riverside on the Anacostia.
How does that make sense at all? I don't know.
It's hard to say.
It's amazing how your worldview can change, though. It's like I still get amazed at things I believed 20, 30 years ago, and your worldview changes, and now it's horrendous, but we didn't even see. I don't think we got it.
Yeah, it is amazing, but I think you're right. People just didn't understand. That was part of it, I think, but there was a lot of factors. So D.C., of course, didn't have a home rule at that time, and so it was the federal government deciding where D.C.'s garbage.
Some was flat out evil.
Yes,
is what
exactly.
You're saying. And I believe that. But I
Yeah.
there was a lot of ignorance too. That along with some people didn't care enough.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned to you before we came on the air, I remember playing in Mayfair Mansions as the ash came down, and we would try to catch the pieces of trash from the dump that was being burned.
Wow.
An open dump being burned in a city, inside a city,
in a residential neighborhood,
neighborhood, and we were dancing and playing with the stuff. I remember Johnny Mercer and I sort of catching pieces of old newspapers that had been half burnt and trying to read it as if they were like a message from heaven or some kind of a strange thing.
Yeah.
And later, when I was reading Dante, it reminded me more of Inferno, and how he didn't know what we were living through. Imagine having all those rainbows and beautiful mist, and then ashes falling on us all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to. There was a passage. I probably should save it to last, but it broke. This is a passage that broke my heart. Let me see if I can find it. There are 2 paragraphs. Bear with me. Many of my friends and neighbors celebrated the Whole Foods grand opening earlier this year. I can barely drive by it without becoming morose, in part because I don't know where to begin explaining the hole in my heart that was left when that forest came down. I knew that forest was not empty. I knew that if a tree fell, there would be many to hear it. I had looked in their faces, taken their portraits, watched them struggle to find food and build their homes and raise their young in trees and tunnels in the ground. I had flown with them to Central America and back again in my imagination. I had heard and experienced firsthand the words of John Burroughs. We little suspect when we walk in the woods whose privacy we are intruding upon. What rare and elegant visitants from Mexico, from Central and South America, and from the islands of the sea are holding their reunions in the branches over our heads. or pursuing their pleasure on the ground before us. For the past decade, my job has been to chronicle the global picture of Whole Foods, Costco, National Harbor, superhighways, coffee and palm plantations, and border conflicts, which all over the earth are supplanting the planetary wild. In the course of this work, while pursuing my displeasure in late 2016, I came across an article headlined, "Rob's Tree Frog Declared Extinct." The article, which ran alongside a photo of the small reddish tree frog with the large, fearful eyes, read, "Known as Tuffy, the tiny male frog, originally from Panama, spent the past few years living by himself at Atlanta Botanical Garden." It went on to note that the species had been unknown to science just 2 years before Tuffy's death marked the end of the tree frog's existence on Earth. And it goes on to say it's only one of many, and so many species becoming extinct. Is that what we humans are leaving? They're killing off of the world that we live in?
Yeah, we are the most evil invasive species, for sure.
Oh, my goodness. But I love us. What we got to do
We
better than
break
this?
it and we can't fix it.
Yes, and I can remember being so happy that the Costco was there, because then some money would be coming into Washington, D.C. instead of going into Maryland. Everybody was traveling to Maryland and leaving them. I'm speaking there. I'm living in Maryland right now while I'm in this show, but my home is in D.C. and then what another perspective you gave me. And I met one of the paragraphs I didn't see. You talked about how you actually felt like you saw the cardinals running away and the titmouse or something like that. I'm sorry, I can't find it right now. And I felt like I could see them running away from the parking lot at Costco. So I'm going to play Joni Mitchell.
They paved paradise, put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hot spot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They took all the trees, put them in a tree museum, and they charged the people $1.50 just to see them. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Hey, farmer, farmer, put away the DDT now. Give me spots on my apples, or leave me the birds and the bees. Please, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Late last night, I heard the screen door slam, and a big yellow taxi took away my old man. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. I said, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot.
All right, many famous people, powerful people have lived in this Anacostia watershed, and I have to remind my listeners that the watershed extends to Tacoma Maryland, Tacoma Park, Maryland, and if you walk down to the Sligo Creek, you'll see signs there saying this is a part of the Anacostia watershed. And so when we throw something away right here in Tacoma, we're throwing it into the Anacostia River and onward to the Chesapeake
Just
Bay.
by driving on the streets, we're messing up the river because all the oil that drips and smoke all goes into the river. I was so surprised that actually my friend who brought you to the show was the contact, Donna, and told me that a large amount of the water, the sewage water, goes untreated into the river. It was like, what? like it was just spilling
what
poison.
about that? Does Anacostia Watershed Organization help that not to happen, or is there, what happens? Is it hopeless, or?
Well, this is actually one of the most hopeful parts of the story, I think, in a way, that the sewage has been a huge problem for a long, long time because of our antiquated sewage pipes and systems. But just in the past year, a huge project was finished by DC Water that within DC is going to take the large majority of the sewage out of the river. So it's what happens is the storm drains overflow when there's too much rain, and all of the sewage and the stormwater flow together into the river. They're made these enormous pipes that are going to make it so that the system almost never overflows. So a huge portion of the sewage is not going to be going into the river anymore, which is a really wonderful thing. Outside of the district, it's a little bit of a different story because we have a different system here. And a lot of our pipes in Prince George's and Montgomery County are these old sort of clay pipes, and they break all the time. And when they break, sewage goes into streams and then goes into the river. And it's a lot harder thing to fix. It can't just be fixed with a different huge tunnel. It's going to need to be fixed more with fixing those pipes as they break and trying to modernize the sewage system. And, ultimately, you were mentioning about the pollution going off the streets and into the storm system. That's another huge problem separate from the sewage. And a lot of that needs to be dealt with renaturalizing our landscape. All of this pavement that we put in, we need to transition it back into permeable surfaces.
Yes, and we actually have done that in some of our neighborhoods. In my neighborhood, I know we have been replacing some of the hard stuff with the soft stuff to make the water go through.
Yeah.
But it's not enough and not fast enough, and
Sounds like a Herculean
Yes.
job. It's like, is it even feasible to fix the system?
we have really. What do you think? We don't have much choice. Are we going to fix it or die?
Yeah.
I don't think I think we'll have to fix it.
Yeah, I think it just takes a long time. I mean, it's one of those things that we broke it pretty quickly. It didn't take us long to really destroy it, but we know how to, little by little, and hopefully gain some momentum and make it faster. But we know how to fix it, and it's going to take momentum. It's going to take people being committed. It's going to take money. But if we care about having a clean river and a clean environment and ecology, it can be done. Yeah.
Yes, I should mention that this wonderful book also includes some of the history of people along the river, and I am particularly attracted, of course, to the Frederick Douglass story. I guess we all can't help but love Frederick Douglass. I was reading something last week about how he was, the first time he gave a speech, he was scared to give one because he didn't think he could speak well, and somebody pushed him and pushed him and pushed him, and finally he got up in front of this crowd. And after he finished speaking, somewhere up north, they said, well, I hated slavery before this, but now, boy, do I hate slavery. And he really, and eloquence came to him when he didn't expect it. I just want to read a certain passage, even though it's not directly related to the river. It's about the histories that attach to the river. One Anacostia voice who never wavered, Frederick Douglass, had grown up a slave, but had secured his own freedom and committed his life to a mission of universal emancipation. Though saddened by the Supreme Court's decision, Douglass saw the fight for freedom as it bent over the long arc of history and counseled courage in the face of defeat. He wrote about the cause of emancipation in the wake of the Dred Scott decision. Of course, this is the decision that the North had to return slaves, runaway slaves. And this is what, isn't it? Power always overreaches itself. You know, it's bad enough what they were doing to slaves in the South, but then they were forcing people who were in the North to agree with them, and that was not endurable, and probably hastened the end of the slavery. Politicians who cursed it now defend it. Ministers once stunned now speak in its praise, and presses which once flamed with hot denunciations against it now surround the sacred cause as by a wall of living fire. Politicians go with it as a pillar of cloud by day, and the press as a pillar of fire by night. With these ancient tokens of success, I, for one, will not despair of our cause. And Douglas was right. The court's decision likely precipitated the escape of many more slaves along the Underground Railroad, strengthened the resolve of anti-slavery activists, and hastened the dawn of the Civil War, which is what I just said. that was like the blow that could not be endured.
Yeah, I think, and that sort of speaks to the what we were talking about before about being discouraged about the magnitude of the task of trying to heal this watershed. You know, there are all these examples throughout history, like that one from Frederick Douglass, where things are so horrible, you just want to give up and just be like, this is never going to happen. And then we keep, you know, but we have all of these models that we can look to that were heroes. They didn't give up, and they, you know, ultimately, you know, they saw the end of a terrible injustice. And, you know, we have to take, like, that has to be what we hold in our hearts as we move forward and try to heal this land, I think.
Yes, we're going to later.
It reminds me of a phrase that I heard once saying, sometimes we do something not because we think we will be able to do it, but because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I think this is the case. Can
Yeah.
we do it?
Yeah.
We're not sure, but
Not sure.
we gotta do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Playing a last song. I want because this song relates to redemption. We have plenty more to talk about, but I like bringing it back to. I don't want to leave all sad and miserable. Okay.
We're gonna bring an old song back to you. We're gonna lift him up right now. I don't know about tomorrow, but right now we're gonna lift him up. Cause God has been good to me. I know he's been good to you. We're gonna lay some burdens down by the riverside. Come on, choir, I want you to help me to sing this song for me. Sing like you've never sung it before. Come on, I'm gonna lay down my burdens. Down by the riverside.
Okay, talking about the Anacostia Watershed Society down by the riverside on a blazing path to make the Anacostia River swimmable and fishable by 2020, maintaining its steadfast course to protect and restore the Anacostia River and its watershed communities by stopping pollution, restoring natural systems, and reconnecting the community to the river. Now let's have a closing word from Krista.
Yeah, so there are a lot of groups working on the river, and it's very encouraging. And the book itself, it's, even though it talks about a lot of hard things, a lot of crushing history, it's not a book about failure. It's a book about redemption, and it talks a lot about some of the incredible work that's being done by Anacostia Watershed Society and the Riverkeeper and the DC Department of Energy and Environment and Montgomery and Prince George's counties, and so it really is looking in to a more hopeful future. And the book's available locally at Politics and Prose and Kramer Books, and you can also get it at online booksellers as well.
Oops.
All right, wonderful. I didn't hear that. I'm so glad to hear that. Oh, what was that? Okay. It is a wonderful book. You really, really need this book. And I'm going to be sharing the link with the wider audience, because it's one of the times when I think that everybody ought to know this story. And
Thank you so
for
much.
your work. Beautiful words and beautiful photographs.
Thank you.
And we'll end with Marian Anderson.
Bye-bye, folks.
What a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. 3 gates in the east, 3 gates in the west, 3 gates in the north, and 3 gates in the south, making it 12.